Hey everyone, the DJI Neo has just got a firmware update bringing new features, some of which massively improve the overall flying experience. Let's jump right in and take a look. Now, if you're new around here, welcome to the Drone Creative, the channel that helps you learn more about flying drones. From the basics to the most advanced techniques to help you get more cinematic videos and better images from your drone. So if you would like to see more of that, then please consider clicking that subscribe button down below. And when you're down there, be sure to check the notification bell so that you will be alerted when my new videos are released. It would be greatly appreciated. Now just quickly, it's worth noting to get access to all these new features, you will need to go through and do firmware and app updates. So you will need to update the DJI Fly app on your smartphone, you'll need to update the firmware on your DJI Neo. If you have a controller, that will need updated as well. And if you're using something like the motion controller and goggles, don't forget to update their firmware as well. Now the first big update to the DJI Neo is added support for the DJI Goggles N3. Now I recently did an in-depth look at these in a recent video which I will link down below, but these are the new goggles made for the Neo and DJI Avata 2. These are DJI's cheapest goggles yet, coming in at around half the price of the Goggles 3 at only $229. And this makes it very affordable if you want to get into FPV flying. But don't think because these are cheaper that they aren't any good. They are fantastic. And flying the Neo with the motion controller is just so much fun. Be sure to check out my in-depth rundown of these new goggles. And again, I'll put a link to that video in the description down below. Now, if you are planning on flying with the goggles, then the next update might interest you. And that is the addition of live view stabilization. So previously, as you flew the Neo around, the camera view you would see in the goggles was unedited, meaning that the footage could be quite shaky. And that's because the stabilization is applied once the footage is saved. So you could only view the smoothed, stabilized footage after you had stopped recording. Well now, if you go to the goggles camera settings and scroll down, you can see you can turn on live view stabilization. And what this is going to do is it's going to apply that rock steady stabilization to the live camera feed. And this has two benefits. Firstly, if you ever got motion sickness from flying with the goggles because the camera view was just too shaky, well now this smoother stabilized view should help with that. But secondly, and the reason why I think this is a big improvement is because you can now get a better idea of what the finished video will look like in real time. Now when I initially reviewed the Neo, I couldn't understand why it didn't have a vertical mode, especially considering this drone seemed to be aimed squarely at people capturing videos for social media. Well, thankfully DJI has now fixed this with its recent firmware update. Now if you go to the smartphone camera settings, you will see you can select a 9:16 vertical video mode. Now it's worth noting that this is just a crop, the camera is not moving, it's cropping in on that 4K footage, and because it does crop in, there is a reduction in resolution. So the outputted vertical video will be in 1080p. The nice thing, however, is that when you do use this mode, you can now see which parts of the image are getting cropped to make sure your subjects are centered and not cut out. And if you're looking to be able to export them clips straight off the drone and upload onto vertical platforms like Instagram, for example, then this mode will be useful to you. Now while testing this new firmware update, I have noticed a really nice interface improvement to the smartphone app. So if you ever wanted to change any of the Smart Snap settings, such as how high or how far away the drone flew from you as it was tracking you, before you had to go to the settings page and then into the individual Smart Snap settings. Now this wasn't ideal because it meant you had to leave the control page and so you couldn't see the camera preview anymore. Well now they have integrated these Smart Snap settings right into that control page so you never have to leave the camera preview. So here you can see I am in follow mode, and down at the bottom if I tap this new button here, a window slides up where I can adjust the individual settings for this Smart Snap mode, and this is just so much better than having to go to an individual page. The biggest and best improvement with this update, however, is the fact that we can now see the camera preview in full screen mode if flying the drone manually with the smartphone, and this just makes the experience so much better. So before, we were locked to only seeing that camera preview in portrait mode, and this meant the camera view was very small and sometimes hard to see. Well, now if you tap this full screen button on the bottom right, you can see that the camera view expands so that it takes up the entire phone screen. And this just makes it so much easier to see what you're filming with the DJI Neo. Now, just like before, you can fly the Neo around, but now the joysticks are over the top of the camera preview, and we can do things like change between video and photo mode and start or stop a recording. Now, if you were somebody who doesn't use Stick Mode 2 when flying a drone with a controller, you might have found flying using the smartphone app quite difficult, and that's because you couldn't change the stick mode. Well, with the recent firmware update, this has now been fixed. So if you go to the settings window and then tap more settings at the bottom and go across to control, you will see a new virtual joystick stick mode button. And in here, you can now change from stick mode 2 to mode 1 or mode 3 to be able to change how the drone reacts to them joystick inputs to something you're more familiar with. Now, another capability of the smartphone app when using the Neo is the fact that you can do an audio recording. Now, the way this works is, as you're capturing video with the Neo, the microphones of your phone will be capturing the audio. So you could be talking to the drone, vlogging for example, and not only will this then get automatically synced over the top of the video, but there's noise reduction also applied to the audio, so it cuts out the background noise, but more importantly the noise of the drone's propellers. Well, now with this firmware update, you can also do this audio recording if flying the drone with the DJI RC-N2 or DJI RC-N3 controller. That's the controller you attach your phone to. So with your phone attached to these controllers, if you go to the camera settings, you will now see the audio recording functionality. And once this is turned on, as you're flying the Neo around with that controller, the microphones off your phone will be recording audio that then gets synced over the top of that drone video. This is an example of me vlogging to the DJI Neo with the audio recording option turned on. Now, as you can hear, the microphones in the smartphone attached to the controller are recording the sound of my voice, and then that audio is being automatically synced over the footage. Now, speaking of that audio recording functionality, this also gets upgraded with this recent firmware update. Now, as I mentioned, there is noise reduction applied to the audio recordings, and some people, including myself, find this to be quite aggressive and could distort the sound of your voice. Well, now DJI is letting us adjust how much noise reduction we want applied. Now we have two options, natural and pure. So let's hear the differences between these two settings. So this is what it sounds like using the natural recording mode. Now, using this recording mode, the noise of the drone's propellers will be reduced, but the ambient sound will get preserved. So this will be perfect if you're in a quieter environment to help you get audio with less distortion. This, on the other hand, is what it sounds like using the pure recording mode. Now, when using this setting, only the sound of human voices will be preserved, so the background noise will get dramatically reduced. So this is perfect if you're recording in noisier environments and want to reduce some of that background noise, or if you're flying the drone closer to yourself and want even more of that propeller noise reduced. The only downside, which you might be able to hear, is due to that extra processing and noise reduction, there is more distortion in the audio. Now, a big improvement to the tracking functionality of the Neo is the fact that the flight speed limit has been increased. So before, if you were tracking yourself doing a fast activity such as cycling, you might have found that the Neo was struggling to keep up with you, and that's because its top speed was limited. Well, now that speed limit has been increased to around 30 kilometers per hour, so the Neo will be able to stick with you much better if you're tracking yourself doing something fast. So overall, this is a very nice little firmware update for the DJI Neo. But I do have two feature requests that I would love to see DJI add with a future firmware update. The first is the ability to adjust the sharpness settings if flying with the smartphone only or the Neo by itself. The footage that comes out of the Neo, in my opinion, is slightly too sharp. It has that digital look to it. Now, you can fix this if you're flying with a controller such as the RC-N3 or the RC2, or even with the goggles, by going into the settings and reducing the sharpness setting, and this just makes the footage look so much better. But unfortunately, we don't have this option if using the smartphone or Neo by itself. I really don't see why we shouldn't have this option in those scenarios. So I would love to see the ability to adjust the sharpness in the smartphone app. Now, something else you might notice as you capture footage with the Neo is the exposure is constantly changing. So if you go from a light area to a dark area, or you change from facing the sun to facing away from the sun, you will see quite large exposure shifts in your footage, and sometimes this doesn't look very good. Now again, this is something that can be prevented if flying with a controller. By simply pressing and holding on the controller screen until the yellow padlock symbol appears, we can lock the exposure. And what this means is, now as you record a video and move the drone around, the exposure will not be changing. But again, we can't do this with the smartphone only. It would be really nice to see a setting added to the smartphone app that when turned on meant anytime you started recording with the DJI Neo, may that be with the smartphone or with the Neo by itself, that the exposure would lock so that it wouldn't shift as the drone flew around. And then once you stopped recording, the exposure would unlock again until the next time you started recording. But those are the two features I would love to see get added to the DJI Neo with a future firmware update. Is there anything you would like to see added to this drone with a firmware update? Why not drop it in the comments down below. So that's everything new with the latest firmware update for the DJI Neo. And I think these improvements, especially the ability to see the camera preview horizontally when flying with your smartphone, make a big improvement to the overall flying experience. Now, if you liked this video and you learned something new, please let me know by giving me a thumbs up and clicking that like button down below. And if you love all things drones, but also action cameras, gimbals and more, and want to learn how to get better images and more cinematic videos with your gear, then please consider clicking that subscribe button down below. And when you're down there, be sure to check the notification bell so that you will be alerted when my new videos are released. It would be greatly appreciated. Now, if you would like to learn even more about the DJI Neo, then I recommend you watch my complete beginner's guide that goes over what everything is and does, along with everything you need to know to get the most from this little drone. And you can do that by clicking up here or by clicking the link in the description down below.